So I'm here today with Georgina Henry, who is from Sydney, Australia. Well, I don't know. Are you originally from Sydney, Australia?
I am.
Okay.
So I haven't moved very far.
Who's originally from Sydney, Australia, from this Cerebral Palsy Alliance, whom I had the pleasure of meeting earlier this year. And as soon as we met and we talked about our similarities, we both have CP. Mm-hmm. We both deal with fatigue and what comes with it. So I'm very excited because I feel like I finally can talk to someone that will relate to my struggle. So thank you so much, Georgie.
Thank you so much for being here. I was very excited to get the invitation.
Of course.
And a friendly face is a bonus.
Of course. I'm happy that we're gonna talk about something that, you know, we both deal on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
And to start off, like tell me how you deal with fatigue in your day-to-day, how it impacts your life.
Yeah.
I mean, you do research on this. This is a huge part of your life. Obviously, in the professional way, this is what you do, but you live with it. So it's very different, right? So you have first-hand experience. So how is your day-to-day and how do you deal with fatigue? What does it look like for you?
That's a big question. So I think what started this was, as I'll explain, fatigue is something I think about all the time. It affects kind of for what social events I say yes to, what I say no to, whether I go in. I'm very lucky to be able to work, but whether I go into the office, whether I work from home, so grateful for that flexibility. Two, and you know, even things like pain or, you know, when you're trying to get good rest, if you're really fatigued and you really want to get good rest, sometimes you don't get good rest. And I think I find it very hard to explain to people the extent to which it impacts on me. And which is why I kind of started just looking and mapping out all the different things that influence my fatigue, and obviously everyone will be different. But I think I was looking at the literature and it's described in so many different ways. I find it very hard to articulate what it actually is to people and how it impacts my life. So, and part of this, it's very preliminary stages. I've only done one kind of deep dive into my fatigue, and the hope is to develop some resources to help more people down the track. But even the language I use, I don't use the word fatigue. I use all sorts of different phrases like I've hit the wall, or I'm totally dumped, or I can't function. So, and the thing is too that every human experience periods of exhaustion and tiredness through different parts of their life, and that's so valid and that's so normal. But how do we distinguish between, you know, normal periods of feeling tired, whether it's you're a parent and you are up at some ridiculous hour looking after a baby, how do we distinguish that from someone who you know, it impairs their ability to function, and some really deliberate management strategies are required for them to be able to participate. So, and it kind of stemmed, this has been happening kind of throughout my whole life. But there have been certain, I guess, situations or periods in my life where I've really had to stop and think about, okay, how am I gonna do what I want to do, and what am I gonna compromise? So a few years ago, it was off the back of getting sick with and it just took my body a very, very long time to kind of get back to baseline functioning. Because when you're lying in bed, for me, I have chronic back pain, and lying in bed still and not moving, which I know is really tricky for a lot of people with cerebral palsy movement. Being in pain all the time, that's also really exhausting. So how, going on a bit of a tangent here, but I really had to stop and think, okay, how am I going to get back to being able to go and do things I enjoy, and how am I going to be able to go to work and work all the hours that I'm supposed to work. And so I started a fatigue diary to kind of track, okay, what am I doing each day, and how am I spending my energy, and how can I be really deliberate in, choosing where I want to invest that energy and restoring energy. So when I kind of got back on top of it a little bit, I thought I really want to it's interesting. I was invited to speak about my experience of fatigue, and I was trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to talk about? Because it's so hard to explain. And a beautiful friend and colleague of mine was like, let's just start drawing a mind map of all these different things you could talk about. And the mind map ended being the main focus of the talk, because it was a mind map of all the different things that contribute to my experiences of fatigue. And it was really interesting. Basically, I had the word fatigue in the middle, and then I had all these different things around it that influence my fatigue. However, a lot of the factors that affect my fatigue are multi-directional. So, for example, things like exercise. That is, and exercise can mean very different things to different people, but for me, that is a way, staying active can be tiring, but doing it can actually also really help prevent fatigue. So a lot of these different factors are multi-directional in their impact on fatigue, and also I really wanted to demonstrate that I think a lot of people, when they talk about or think about fatigue, they think about physical fatigue, which makes sense also in the context of cerebral palsy, because it's a physical disability. But we might go on to talk a little bit more about this, but and still need to do more research, but I think there are also cognitive and emotional elements of fatigue, because even just trying to think through and navigate how you're going to manage fatigue, that takes energy. And also accepting that actually I'm not going to be able to do everything I want to do. That's just a fact. That takes energy too. So how am I gonna pick and choose? And I mean, sometimes I'm like, it means that for me, I'm very intentional with who I spend my time with and what I do, which is kind of a good thing. But there are obviously times where I wish I did have more energy to, like I was saying to you just then before maybe we were recording, but we're at a conference, and there was a session I really wanted to go to, but I just had to do that from bed this morning. So
absolutely.
Cheers for online conferences and accessibility. I was very grateful that I didn't have to miss out on that.
Yeah, I mean, yes, I'm the same way. I have to be, at this point in my life, I'm 37, and I have to be very strategic as to how I spend my energy, because I do have a very limited amount of time. As the day goes by, I realize that I just have no energy. Like, I did yesterday 4 interviews. I was wiped out. I had to go back to the hotel and sleep for 4 hours. I had to cancel because there's just no way I can continue. And going along the same line, and you said, aside from the physical aspect of fatigue, there's also another part of your research that you mentioned, how emotional labor is also drains your energy, right? And like, for example, able body expectations, moving around in these sort of expectations that we have to maintain, advocacy work, that is also very draining. That's something you mentioned. Can you tell me more about that, about the emotional aspect of it that a lot of people really don't talk about? They only think about the physical aspect of fatigue.
So, and again, this is just based on my own experience. So I'm sure there are many different ways emotional labor or emotional fatigue can impact people. And I don't think it's necessarily specific to disability. There are so many things that happen in life that kind of suck, right? And when you experience discrimination or disappointment, it drains your energy. It's just harder. And like, for example, I am so for involving people with lived experience in research and in this conference. It's been amazing to see the involvement of lived experience. But part of that is being vulnerable and talking about your story and talking about, the wonderful things that people with disabilities can do and can achieve. But also, I believe in order to authentically capture someone's story, it means talking about things that can be really tricky, whether that's, I mean, there's so many examples and I won't go into heaps of them now, but, whether it's exclusion or whether it's just, let's say, wanting to be able to do things that you just can't do, or, whether it's someone's had a traumatic experience that, there is value in sharing that, but being vulnerable takes energy. And I think we really need to try and continue to work on how can we create really safe and inclusive and supportive environments to really recognize the emotional kind of labor or work that comes with having frank and open discussions, whether that's for advocacy purposes or for research purposes or just in general in life. But I think it's a real thing, I think, and something that we don't always talk about, and I think it's really important that we do.
Absolutely. And I have 2 more questions for you, Georgie. I mean, you and I will have another interview. That is for sure. This is like part 1.
Talking a lot.
Yeah. This is part 1, because I feel there's so much value in everything that you're saying. And a lot of people can I'm listening to you and I can relate to everything. What is something you think that healthcare professionals miss or misunderstand when it comes to fatigue of people with CP?
It's a really interesting question. And to be honest, I don't necessarily know whether everyone with CP is necessarily aware of everything that impacts their fatigue. From a health professional point of view, I think it's really important to validate the person's experiences. I think it's so easy to not intentionally minimize, but not really understand how
the big impact.
How much it can impact. And I think also all the different things that can influence fatigue. So I think trying to, and this takes time and practice, but trying to prompt people to really think, okay, what are all the different things that you're doing every day, or the relationships that you have, or the different thought patterns or beliefs that you have that are impacting your energy. So I think management, there are no evidence-based guidelines for people with cerebral palsy.
Don't worry, that is my next question.
But really trying to acknowledge it, validate it, understand it's real, and then trying to work with the people you work with to unpack, okay, what are the things that are impacting on your fatigue, and who are the best people to support you. And that might be a physio if you identify that physical activity would be helpful, or it could be psychologists if you realize that the person's beliefs around fatigue and the energy levels is something that needs to or may benefit from changing, or it could be having friends to do fun things with as a total break or distraction, just like any other human. I'm going on a bit of a tangent, but really validating the person's experiences and then trying to think really holistically about what are the things that this person needs support with to be able to function.
That is, you really are dropping some pearls here. We'll make sure to.
I'm not sure about that, but anyway.
I think more than the need for evidence-based, which is my last and final question. I think the fact that you're speaking from firsthand, that there is the power. The power is in your story.
Yeah.
So here is the question: if you could help write evidence-based guidelines for managing fatigue in CP, what is one key recommendation that you would make, or recommendations?
That's a big question. It's a work in progress, but I think what I said before is validating the person's experience, and then whether it's drawing a mind map, whether it's having a discussion, really trying to identify all the different things that impact fatigue, and then whether it's keeping a fatigue diary to try and identify those different things, and then coming up with a plan of who are the support people going to be to intervene in these different areas. Okay. And I will say that people with cerebral palsy obviously have a physical disability, and there are lots of different challenges that come with that. But there are also people. So I'm stating the obvious, but there are also other things that could be happening in their lives that are completely unrelated to disability that are also affecting their fatigue, because people with cerebral palsy live every experience through life with cerebral palsy. So I will put a caveat on this. This is all based on my lived experience thus far. And I'm looking forward to hopefully doing some more research in this area to kind of, as you say, make these guidelines and recommendations evidence-based. But I think really taking a really holistic approach and listening to people with cerebral palsy and families about the things that they think are also impacting on their fatigue, because at the end of the day, even though you have expertise to offer in helping them identify the different things that might be impacting upon their energy levels, they also the ones that live in their body and know what's going on in their head.
Yeah.
So they also have an invaluable amount of expertise to share.
I look forward to hopefully collaborating in some way, Georgie, and with you and your research. I think what you're doing is incredible in the Cerebral Palsy Alliance. Please do continue to do that. And I mean, I know that everything is based on scientific research and stuff. But I think it's lived experience that truly should inform how we develop guidelines. Especially, I've always said we are our best advocates. You know, we know what's best for us. So I think everything you mentioned is so important. And I will say that because I felt it, to validate everyone's experience, because I constantly have to prove to doctors that I'm in pain. It's like, oh really? It doesn't seem like it. I'm like,
it is, I can assure you.
Yeah, you know, so there's this constant anger in that way.
Yeah.
That you have to prove your disability, or that you have to prove that you're in pain. Thank you so much, Georgie, for taking the time.
Thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure talking to you.
We're going to do a follow-up interview once, you tell me, okay, I have 30 more cases, or
I've sorted it out.
Yes. And we'll do a follow-up, and it'll be much longer. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much for having me. It's been, a pleasure, and look forward to touching base again sometime in the future.
Absolutely. I have to go back to Australia.
Yes,
I love Australia.
you do. You have to come visit.
Again, yes. So that's it for this episode, but do stay tuned for other episodes coming up live from the EACD, IAACD. Oh my god, it's so long. So, yes. Thank you so much, Georgia.
Thanks.